Colleagues, harassment is a matter which sometimes one thinks you don't have time to address it because we are so pressurized in our organizations. We are with clients continuously, but if there's one aspect that deserves integration, as Kevin said, into organizations from a durability or sustainability point of view, it's this particular matter of harassment. So I'm going to take you through a few slides. I will make them available to you. I've also got a policy template and a risk assessment template that you are most welcome to. I'll send them to Krista, and she's welcome to distribute the slides and the other documents. But colleagues, the Code of Good Practice is particularly important because South Africa's government ratified ILO Convention 190. And of course, as soon as we ratify these conventions as countries, we now have to put our money where our mouths are. And then obviously we need to ensure that these are addressed. So I'm going to be talking this morning, probably most of the talking around the Code of Practice, practically what it means to you as organizations and how to address it with your clients. And then I'm joined by a colleague, Courtney, who's going to be just ending off the session talking about the millennials that are in our organizations, talking about the diversity that they bring and the whole issue of LGBTQIA+. So we hope to keep you engaged and we hope to give you some value add. Of course, diversity, equality and inclusion requires us to stretch our brains. It requires us to often change our mindsets. It doesn't mean that we've got to throw our values and our beliefs out the window, but what it does require, colleagues, is to change our approach to saying that we want to rather embrace diversity and use the benefits that come from that. Just before we started, I thought, to make it a bit more specific to you in your industry, let's look at it right up front from a temporary employment services point of view. You are most welcome to put questions in the chat box and make comments. I really appreciate that. Anything that you'd like to discuss, we are all, everyone on this call are fully immersed in your industry and in labor relations, so we can collaborate. But if we look at it just from an employment equity point of view around TESs, colleagues, we've got to remember that Chapter 2 of the Employment Equity Act specifically says that for purposes of unfair discrimination, the TES and the client are jointly and severally liable. In other words, colleagues, you remember Section 6 of the Employment Equity Act says that no person may unfairly discriminate directly or indirectly, and then it gives you on race, gender, sex, sexual orientation, culture, language, birth, etc. So we've got to understand from the outset that neither our clients nor ourselves can discriminate unfairly. And you might say, but John, we're talking about harassment. Where are you coming on discrimination? Well, the Employment Equity Act specifically says harassment is a form of discrimination. So your clients and you are in the firing line for that. We also have to remember, colleagues, that for purposes of Chapter 3 of the Employment Equity Act, where we talk about affirmative action, employment equity plans, reporting to the Department of Employment and Labor, once again there, after 3 months, the client is the confusion where clients sometimes are confident in terms of who reports on the TES assignees. But it's clear, after 3 months, for purposes of the Chapter 3, the client is the deemed employer. Now, what does this mean practically when we talk about harassment, colleagues? The first thing that it means is that you as a TES and your client need policies and practices on harassment, whether it's sexual, racial, religious, whatever it is. Companies need these policies. You as a TES and your client needs that. Awareness creation is not a suggestion. The Code of Practice, as well as Section 15 of the Employment Equity Act, says that every employer must take steps to further diversity at the workplace, which would include awareness creation and capacitation. It includes risk assessment. Colleagues, if you've read the Code of Practice on sexual and racial harassment and violence and harassment, you would have seen it says that organizations need to take proactive approaches, which would include conducting a risk assessment, which I'm going to give to you guys. Well, let me not say guys, to you colleagues. And that Excel spreadsheet, colleagues, has got 18 questions, and you can use certain types of jobs might have the very nature of their employment. On client premises might have a heightened risk of being harassed. Night shift workers, it's processes, your disciplinary inquiry, your code, and your grievances also have to cater for harassment. So, colleagues, effectively what we're saying is it requires close collaboration between you and your client to sit down and say, let's align our policies, our practices, let's align our training, and here's maybe an area of value add that you can give to your clients. So it's actually a great opportunity. It's a great opportunity, colleagues, for this to have to drive a proposition with your clients. So the other thing that I want to point out how serious the issue of harassment is, and I see there's a chat in the chat box in this regard, but an incredibly serious matter for the company, for management and leaders, as well as for individuals. This is why, from a legal point of view, forget about the psychological and emotional hurt and distress and anxiety, but from a labor law point of view, all of us on this call know that labor laws totally eliminate and do not look kindly at any form of harassment, whether it's the LRA in terms of automatically unfair dismissals, whether it's the Employment Equity Act. What we sometimes don't think of, colleagues, is civil law. The Promotion of Equality and Prevention of Unfair Discrimination Act extends the prohibition on harassment to non-employees. So your clients, your suppliers, your visitors, your contractors, people who are not employees, but who are subject to harassment by your employees or are being harassed, or they harass your employees, like for example, in the case of your client harassing staff or suppliers, colleagues, the PAPUDA Act specifically takes a look at extending the protection to non-employees and to workers in general. And we've seen recent cases where like 4 million rand has been awarded in a civil court for duress, anxiety, psychological damage, hardship, and loss of income because of civil claims. And then, of course, interestingly, the PAPUDA Act specifically says that if someone is found guilty in a civil court for harassment, that they should be referred for criminal prosecution. That is hectic. I mean, criminal prosecution under the Criminal Procedures Act and the Cyber Crimes Act. And let's not forget, the deeper we move into the fourth industrial revolution, the more we use social media platforms, emails, whatever it is, Telegram, WhatsApp. Colleagues, be very, very, very careful in terms of using social media and any form of cyber platform, because without thinking, you may be sharing particular posts that may be sexual, racial, religious. That is a crime, colleagues. That is a form of harassment. Any intimate images that you share as well, or threats of violence. So you can see very quickly that people can get into a whole lot of trouble if they don't address this. And of course, when we talk about people, I'm including legal entities. So if companies do not put these policies, procedures, risk assessments in place, well, the client or the company itself is deemed to be vicariously liable for the delictual acts of the staff. That is why you do not want to just leave this to chance. This is why I started with this discussion. So you need policies, you need to do awareness creation during induction and regularly. You need to do a risk assessment, and you need to make sure that any form of dispute or grievance around harassment is addressed quickly and effectively, because if you don't, the company itself can be deemed to be vicariously liable. And your service level agreements with your clients, of course, need to also include discussions around liability for these matters. We've got so caught up in dismissal liability and other types of practices, we don't always discuss issues around unfair discrimination and those types of liability. So, colleagues, today we're looking at legislation, we're looking at the Business Imperative Act, if organizations are embracing of diversity. Forbes did a research paper, and they found that companies with a safe environment, companies that embrace diversity, have got a 19% higher revenue than companies with low levels of diversity. And the reason for that, colleagues, is that we work in a very pressurized environment. The last thing we want to do is work in an environment where we're being harassed, where you've got to cover your back all the time, where you've got to look out for people and protect yourself. That should be a safe place to work. There are many threats externally. There are people that want to close our businesses down. There's disruptive technology. Let's rather have a strong culture, and let's go and fight against those external threats as a united front, irrespective of our differences. So let's get going, and we're going to start looking at the code of practice. We're then going to look at workplace alignment, risk leaders, managers, and as individual employees. And then I will do a call to action at the back end of this. Well, it's on violence and harassment at the workplace. That's always an aspect of harassment. Now, I mentioned earlier that Section 6, subsection 3 of the Employment Equity Act, colleagues, says that harassment is a form of unfair discrimination. Harassment has got a psychological, a physical, an economic, and many other impacts on individuals. What's really interesting for me, colleagues, is the middle section of this slide. You see, the reality is people have different views of harassment. Some people are relatively thick-skinned, and if someone is in their face or makes a joke at their expense or potentially shares a rude joke with them or a picture or an image, some people are thick-skinned and they say they couldn't care less. Other people are hypersensitive and they see things that aren't even really there. Now, because we've got different backgrounds and values and mindsets, the code of practice has to create some form of certainty of what harassment is. And that's why it goes to this detail, and it says harassment includes the impairment of an employee's dignity. So there was the ShopRite case, which you would have read about, where a general manager at ShopRite smacked a lady on her buttocks and then giggled, and of course things went from one step to the next, and it ended up at the labor court. Now, that obviously impaired the dignity of this female employee. The general manager says, well, he doesn't think the buttocks are really private, the buttocks are buttocks, and the employee said, well, they're my private parts. You can't do that. It impairs my dignity. So don't go there. Negative impact on personal well-being. Can you imagine this woman going home to her husband and telling him potentially, or to her partner, and telling them what happened at the workplace? So colleagues, very, very important that that you are aware of the definition of harassment. I see there are some connection problems. I apologize. I'm down in East London and I am trying my best with the connection. Keegan, if it carries on, please do let me know, and I might have to try and reconnect. Abusive conduct, abusive language and bullying, constant criticism. That's interesting. Constant criticism. Have you ever had a boss who is always at you? Nothing is good enough. They say that you should be working harder. They push you for more. When you achieve your targets, they add on, etc., etc. Constant criticism, the extent that it breaks people down, is not acceptable in this code. What you should be doing is, if you have an employee who is really performing poorly or misconducting themselves, well, colleagues, you then need to invoke the disciplinary code or performance management procedures. You cannot continuously, verbally, emotionally break the person down. Emotional abuse, humiliation, being intolerant of personal circumstances, or pressurizing an employee to resign. Now, if we take this to the next level, then we'll, of course, see the characteristics of harassment. Firstly, it's unwanted conduct. Secondly, it impairs the dignity of the person. It creates a hostile and intimidating work environment with the intention of getting someone to submit or to induce certain consequences if they do not comply with your demands. It is a form of unfair discrimination. It's a very serious form of unfair discrimination. Now, on the right-hand side, you will see that the code of practice differentiates between what we call vertical and horizontal discrimination and harassment. So vertical harassment, as you well know, is where someone in authority uses and abuses their power and authority to harass someone. And then horizontally, that is typical of colleagues that are generally of an equal status that harass one another, Kevin. So I just want to point out that both of these forms of harassment are covered in the code of practice. And then the code of practice goes into even more detail by saying that harassment can be physical, like slapping someone on the buttocks, psychological, in other words, by breaking down someone's self-esteem, by belittling them and ostracizing them, and it could be verbal. So colleagues, the definition of harassment is really, really important, and all of these types of harassment, being sarcastic, rolling your eyes and being condescending, your facial expressions, ostracizing people, or excluding people because of their characteristics or their groups, those are all very, very clear and specific definitions of harassment at the workplace. So I'd love to know, we should have actually done a bit of a poll, but I'd love to know how many of you have been subject to some form of harassment. On the one hand, it might be a joke or someone who is potentially insulting you. But on the other hand, colleagues, it could be rape, it could be sexual assault. The point is, all of that comprises harassment. So as I said, please do post questions if you would like in the chat box. I'm happy to answer any of those questions. Just make sure you are on mute so that we don't get feedback. Very important also is you can see the scope of people who can be either victims or perpetrators of sexual harassment and racial harassment, etc. The victims could include owners of companies, employers, managers, and I must say, I've come across many organizations where managers have felt harassed by employees. That's quite interesting. And of course, it's prevalent. Of applicants, they're also in a position of vulnerability sometimes, where the interviewer looks for quid pro quo harassment. I'll give you a job for some sex. How does that sound? And of course, they are vulnerable in that context. People in training, volunteers, suppliers. You see, colleagues, the harassment laws are workplace, civil, and criminal. Don't go there. My boss, Johnny Goldberg, who most of you will be very familiar with, he always says to us the following. He says, listen, before you go and do something, like slap a woman on the buttocks, tell a rude joke, or a joke about students in a condescending way, before you transmit intimate images, the bottom line is, would you do that if your partner, your husband, your wife, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, your life partner is standing next to you? Would you do that? And of course, that's quite a good test, because probably you would not do that. The key principles in terms of the code of good practice is that employers must, very important, and I want you to do a self-audit. The code says employers must assess the risk of harassment. They must take proactive and remedial steps to prevent harassment. What does that mean? Well, it means policies, procedures, grievance procedures. It means that you must have a policy. Look at what it says. It says your policy must have a zero tolerance attitude. So if you don't have the words zero tolerance in your policy, well, you better immediately after this call go and amend it, because that's what the minister says must be in there. You've got to create an appropriate climate. And one of the big challenges we're facing as an organization with our clients is we go and do client strategic planning, we talk to our clients' leadership, but there are toxic leadership environments where leaders do not set the tone required for this. You won't believe how many of our clients to say to us, is abusive language really a form of harassment? Because we use abusive language every day with our meetings and our staff. We swear and F and blind and whatever. Colleagues, that's a toxic environment. You have to immediately address complaints and not trivialize them. Harassment policies must be aligned to the code, communicated to all employees. Please make sure that whether it's in your induction, whether it's in your manuals, whatever you do, make sure you keep a record, colleagues, that your employees and your assignees are going through some form of awareness training. Then it says at least the following statements must be in your policy. So the minister is getting quite prescriptive here. The minister's saying, listen, when I come and read your policy, when you end up at the CCMA or the Labour Court, you better make sure these 6 statements are clear in your policy. The first one is we will not tolerate it. It's a form of discrimination. If we investigate, we will be exceptionally confidential because it can create huge reputational harm for people if there is a malicious accusation that is made. That you've got procedures to address this, that it's a disciplinary offense to undermine an employee's right to lodge a grievance in good faith. And importantly, if anyone comes to you and says they're being harassed, you need to make available counseling, treatment, and other support programs if they require that. And whilst you are going about your business in investigating these issues. Code of practice, colleagues, then talks about the procedure. Now, this is slightly different to your normal grievance procedure, and that's why I'm highlighting it today. You see, the normal grievance procedure, as we know, requires you to go to your immediate superior, to their immediate superior, and then you follow the process until you've been to everybody, and then you go to the CCMA. Harassment is a bit different, for the simple point of view that if you bring it to your employer's attention, the employer will investigate it confidentially. The employer will consult and gather evidence and take steps to eliminate it. But once the employer has all this information, the employer now goes to the aggrieved employee and says, Krista, we've done the investigation and you've got two options. Option one is you can have an informal approach. Let's together, or let me go to John and say to him that his jokes are offensive. Let me go to John and point out to him and make him aware that his language is offensive, or that his pronouns that he uses are offensive. And if we resolve it informally and John changes his ways, well, then it's all good. But Krista, if you're not comfortable with that, we can have a formal process and a formal grievance that can be followed to its conclusion. So colleagues, the code of practice does, however, say that some harassment is so serious that you can't go informally. So sexual harassment from a point of view of sexual assault, rape, threats of violence, intimidation, obviously informally, that's not going to cut it. Those have to go formal. So I'm not going to go through all of this. You can read, you're going to get the slides. We know what sexual harassment is. Here's some details of what it is. It can involve kissing, sexual assault, rape. You can follow this through, looking seductively at your colleagues. That is obviously sexual harassment. Sexual favoritism, wolf whistling, we've been through that. We know that that is not acceptable. Well, of course, you get different types of harassment, colleagues: racial, ethnic, or social origin. Racist conduct, of course, which is demeaning, humiliating, and undermines dignity, creates a hostile or intimidating environment. You see, colleagues, cartoons, racist jokes, abusive language, name calling. Now, the reality is that in many instances, we have got a mindset and we have to be more sensitive to other people. I did training on this here in East London yesterday, and I said to one of the colleagues, I said, when you talk about harassment, what comes to mind? And he said to me, John, what comes to mind is being inconsiderate to other people. You see, we need to be leaders. We need to be people who take care of our people. We can't just be good managers and issue instructions. We need to balance that with strong leadership, and we need to take care of the people who are in our charge. Because after all, colleagues, all your clients are human. All your assignees are human. All your colleagues are human. Your suppliers are human. If you don't understand people, well, then you don't understand business. That's the differentiator, colleagues. So racial harassment is very specifically, and sexual harassment is very specifically unpacked in this particular environment. So that's the code of practice. Enjoyed that little summary because, goodness, it's pretty long. Okay. Let's go to the workplace alignment. Now, colleagues, the reality is that the workplace is an environment where people go to work. It's meant to be a safe haven. It's meant to be an environment where people's diversities are harnessed for the greater good of the business. We want people who are motivated. We want people who are valued for their differences. I want to just point out that your organizational culture should be characterized by high levels of trust. Trust means people with character and people who are competent in their jobs. Now, I want to encourage you to Google this video of Simon Sinek. And Simon Sinek talks specifically to how to create a culture of, I actually want to see if I can play it. Just bear with me. It looks like I can maybe play it. Just hold on.
In the military, they give medals to people who are willing to sacrifice themselves so that others may gain. In business, we give bonuses to people who are willing to sacrifice others so that we may gain. Yeah, right? So I asked myself, where do people like this come from? And my initial conclusion was that they're just better people. That's why they're attracted to the military. These better people are attracted to this concept of service. But that's completely wrong. What I learned is that it's the environment. And if you get the environment right, every single one of us has the capacity to do these remarkable things. And more importantly, others have that capacity too. I've had the great honor of getting to meet some of these who we would call heroes, who've put themselves and put their lives at risk to save others. And I asked them, why would you do it? Why did you do it? And they all say the same thing. Because they would have done it for me. It's this deep sense of trust and cooperation. So trust and cooperation are really important here. The problem with concepts of trust and cooperation is that they are feelings, they're not instructions. I can't simply say to you, trust me, and you will. I can't simply instruct two people to cooperate, and they will. It's not how it works, it's a feeling. So where does that feeling come from? If you go back 50,000 years to the Paleolithic era, to the early days of Homo sapien, what we find is that the world was filled with danger. All of these forces working very, very hard to kill us. Nothing personal. Whether it was the weather, lack of resources, maybe a saber-toothed tiger, all of these things working to reduce our lifespan. And so we evolved into social animals, where we lived together and worked together in what I call a circle of safety, inside the tribe, where we felt like we belong. And when we felt safe amongst our own, the natural reaction was trust and cooperation. There are inherent benefits to this. It means I can fall asleep at night and trust that someone from within my tribe will watch for danger. If we don't trust each other, if I don't trust you, that means you won't watch for danger. Bad system of survival. The modern day is exactly the same thing. The world is filled with danger, things that are trying to frustrate our lives or reduce our success, reduce our opportunity for success. It could be the ups and downs of an economy, the uncertainty of the stock market. It could be a new technology that renders your business model obsolete overnight. Or it could be your competition that is sometimes trying to kill you. It's sometimes trying to put you out of business, but at the very minimum is working hard to frustrate your growth and steal your business from you. We have no control over these forces. These are a constant and they're not going away. The only variable are the conditions inside the organization. And that's where leadership matters, because it's the leader that sets the tone. When a leader makes the choice to put the safety and lives of the people inside the organization first, to sacrifice their comforts and sacrifice the tangible results so that the people remain and feel safe and feel like they belong, remarkable things happen.
Colleagues, really just wanted to share that with you, because my recommendation is to take a look at your organizational culture. Not only because it's good practice, as we see, but the Employment Equity Act and the Code of Practice requires you to create an enabling environment for diversity, equality, and inclusion and belonging. And if you don't get that right, and if your leadership are not made aware of the role that they play, people will not feel that they are able to, report harassment, and that it won't be dealt with appropriately.
In the military,
So we need to ensure that in our environments at work, we create an environment of psychological safety where people, without fear of negative consequence, can raise concerns, can pursue their dreams, pursue their objectives, and they are comfortable in terms of their personal growth going forward. So culture eats strategy for breakfast. We've heard that very, very often, breakfast, lunch, and supper. That is the importance of organizational culture. All the policies in the world are not going to remedy a poor leadership culture. Unfortunately, leaders are very reluctant to hold the mirror up to themselves. They've got fixed mindsets, many of them. They don't want to change their ways. They don't listen effectively. And of course, that creates silence, distance, and resistance in organizations. And the net effect of that is that from a harassment point of view, colleagues, companies are hugely at risk. Well, talking about risks, what are some of the key risks that you need to take back to your executives in terms of justifying why you need to have a very clear program around harassment? The first risk, colleagues, is under the Employment Equity Act amendments, which Kevin and the colleagues at NEDLAC have been negotiating, under the Employment Equity Act amendments, if you are found guilty of any form of unfair discrimination, which will include harassment at the CCMA or in the labor courts, you will not get a certificate of compliance for a period of 12 months, which means in Section 53 that you cannot tender for government work, and it definitely will exclude you from public sector work. Just like you have a BE certificate and a tax clearance certificate, you won't have an employment equity certificate. The second thing is vicarious liability. If you cannot lead evidence in those adjudicative forums that you've taken the necessary steps to prevent harassment and to deal with it effectively, you as an organization can be held vicariously liable for the delictual acts of your staff, whether that's your management, your direct employees, your assignees that are on site on your client's premises. Thirdly, you are also personally at risk. If you harass someone, you are subject to civil and criminal charges. Fourthly, unfair dismissal. You've got to be very careful that you don't create an environment that's intolerable and that forces people to resign under duress. And finally, automatically unfair dismissals, where people are dismissed because of their race, their gender, their sex, their family responsibilities, and their beliefs, etc. So you'll see that it makes legal sense and business sense to have an environment that embraces diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So what about this risk assessment? Now, you can do a number of different kinds of risk assessment. You can have focus group discussions, you can do a survey, you can do a whole range of things, but just do something, because it is required for you to take a look and to try and establish the risks in your organizations. So what I'm going to do now is just give you an example of what we'll be sending you that you could maybe use in one way or the other to do a risk assessment. So on the screen, you'll see we've developed this questionnaire. So you don't need to necessarily issue this questionnaire to all 1,000 of your staff members. Maybe take a sample. And what you do is you then decide how you want to configure this. But here's some examples of questions that you could use for a risk assessment. Do you sometimes feel you're being harassed by a manager, a colleague, customer, or contractor? Of course, that would be in the context of the definition of harassment. Do you feel excluded because of your differences? Do any managers, colleagues, customers use a sarcastic tone? So what you do is you can then select frequency with which it happens, the impact. As I say, some people say, I don't really mind if someone calls me a moron. That's cool. I just tell them they're morons as well, but some people might not feel that way. So then you can take a look at it. Does not really bother me. It's a big problem. It affects my personal life. And once they've gone through these, colleagues, you will then get a risk assessment that can be benchmarked against a heat map. And you will actually be told whether or not you should be taking action in terms of a particular aspect of harassment, whether it's abusive language, sarcasm, etc., etc. So I hope that you find that useful. I hope that it's going to be meaningful as you do at least try to proactively identify areas of risk in your organizations. Let's go on now to the very, very important matter of the skills requirements. Now, Simon Sinek alluded to the fact that leaders set the tone, that leaders create an environment that is either healthy or unhealthy in terms of a culture. Now, what's really important is we need to understand our staff members have gone through incredibly difficult times over the last 2.5 years. In particular, we've had COVID-19, we've had social unrest, we've had natural disasters. People have lost loved ones, people have lost health pressure. The price of fuel, just the cost of living, is a huge concern. And we've got to understand that in our workplaces, our employees have got heightened levels of emotion. People have got very, very high levels of emotion. Some are feeling rebellious, others are feeling, they're adaptive because they're too scared to say no to things because they might get dismissed or someone might think they're not committed to their jobs. And when people have very high levels of emotional distress, colleagues, they have the inability often to rationalize and think logically and reasonably. It's called the amygdala hijack. Now, when your psyche is in a heightened state of emotional turmoil or emotional stimulation, it disconnects your amygdala, disconnects your rational brain. Your amygdala is that part of you which is fight, flight, or freeze. So if you've been in a road rage incident, or if you've been really, really passionate about something, it disconnects your rational mind and you don't make good decisions. And that is why emotional intelligence training is so important for organizations, because we need to capacitate our leaders and our managers to respond and to emotionally regulate rather than to react. We need to teach them that each decision has a price. You cannot just smack a woman or man or person on the buttocks when you want to. You cannot just share jokes at someone else's expense. You cannot make demeaning comments. You see, people need to have a filter and an emotional muscle that limits the probabilities of harassment. And we need to give our leaders and our employees the tools to do this. One of the realizations that we have come to, and some of the conclusions, is you get two extremes, colleagues, of people in the workplace. You get people who are insensitive. And you could potentially think of someone in your organization right now who's insensitive. They're emotionally blind. They don't see things, they don't feel things, they don't hear things. They're generally very immersed in themselves. In the extreme, insensitive people are narcissists. They derailed in the extreme. Unfortunately, only 2.5% are narcissists. On the other extreme, we have people who are hypersensitive. They see things that don't even exist. If their boss looks at them funnily, they think, what have I done? Or what is he doing? Or she doing? Or they doing? So we've got these two extremes. Hypersensitive people on the extreme suffer from dependent personality disorder. Now, you can imagine if someone is being harassed at the workplace and they have got a dependent personality, they depend on other people for their own sense of belonging and love and appreciation, they might not want to report issues of harassment because they don't want to rock the boat. They're adaptive, they're accommodating. But on the other hand, you've got people who are insensitive. They make crude jokes, they swear, they conduct themselves in inappropriate ways at the workplace. So we've got to ensure that we make people aware of who they are. We've got to ensure that they are able to connect with meaning. You see, work is not just about the task. Work is about connecting with people and creating that environment of mutual respect and human dignity. Now, we don't have a lot of time today, but I want to just encourage you to look into emotional intelligence training, colleagues. It is so important. for many, many, many reasons. And research shows that there are significant returns on investment from that point of view. Lower staff turnover, high levels of productivity, higher levels of quality standards. So what have we done thus far? We've looked at the code of practice and we've unpacked the definition of harassment. We've looked at sexual harassment, we've looked at racial harassment, and we've looked at procedures that need to be followed in order to address this. Then we've looked at how to align it at the workplace. What do organizations need to put in place in order to comply? We've looked at risks. We've looked at labor law risks. We've looked at civil risks. We've looked at criminal risks. Even the Cyber Crimes Act is hugely, hugely important. Your electronic communications policies need to be updated. And it's not just about employee on employee. It includes non-employees. And then we ended off now talking about the importance of emotional intelligence. You see, the truth, colleagues, is we've placed so much emphasis on IQ. And the bad news is if you've got low IQ, if you were born with low IQ, you will die with low IQ because your IQ doesn't change over your lifetime. The good news is if you were born with a low EQ, you can gain and nurture your EQ. It's like a muscle that you can build over time. The problem is very few people build that muscle because it takes self-sacrifice. It takes the needs, putting the needs of others ahead of your needs. But goodness gracious me, the returns on investment are huge. It makes the place of work a great place to be at. It makes you feel that you want to go out of your way to contribute to the greater good of your organization and of other people. So what is in your workplace skills plan for next year or for this year? Have you put emotional intelligence training in there? Have you put harassment training into that? Please go and have a look at it. Well, let's take a look. Next stage. The importance of dealing properly with harassment and bullying under the Employment Equity Act. So we've already said this. Chapter 2 of the Employment Equity Act says that no person may unfairly discriminate. No person. Your client, your colleagues, your suppliers, no person may unfairly discriminate. And then section 60 says that if it is alleged that an employee, while at work, contravened the provision of this act or engaged in conduct such as harassment, that the employee's employer would constitute a contravention of a provision of this act, the alleged conduct must be immediately brought to the attention of the employer. So employees and observers need to immediately report this. Then the employer must consult the parties, take the necessary steps to eliminate this conduct. And look at this, colleagues. We spoke about vicarious liability. If the employer fails to take the necessary steps, and it is proved that the employee contravened the provision, the employer must be deemed to also have contravened that provision. However, despite that, an employer is not liable for the conduct of its employees if it has been able to prove that it did all that was reasonably practicable to ensure that the employee would not act in contravention. Please, it cannot be any clearer than that. Then, specifically in the amendments to the Employment Equity Act, it says here that the minister will only give you a certificate of compliance under employment equity if, amongst other things, you've met your numerical targets, if you've submitted your EA 2 and 4, but look at this, in point B, it says, if there's been no finding by the CCMA or the court within the previous, and that's now changed to 1 year. So you won't get a certificate of compliance if you've been found guilty of any form of unfair discrimination. If we look at what's happening in the Employment Equity Act domain, we know that the Parliament have passed the Employment Equity Act amendments. What you should be doing now is socializing the amendments with your leadership. You need to be engaging with your employment equity committees and saying to them, there's ministerial targets, there's harassment, and there's certificates of compliance. We better make sure that our house is in order, because over the next 5 years, we've got to meet our targets. And if we don't meet these targets, unemployment equity, we will not get certificate of compliance. And more importantly, if we don't, if we get found guilty of any form of discrimination, then we will also not get our certificate of compliance. So you need to look at the task. The task is have a committee, have meetings, have a plan, report every year, but you need to complement the task with an EQ and managers and workers that work in the context of emotional intelligence, that they don't react, but then they respond rather. So colleagues, this is really, really critical. If we look at the employment equity referrals to the CCMA, we'll see that there were over 2,000 referrals under the Employment Equity Act to the CCMA in this period of time. Can you imagine if all of these companies were found guilty and did not get certificates of compliance, the impact that that would have on the organization? Now we're going to change gear. I've asked Courtney to come and speak to us about a very, very interesting aspect of harassment, which is the LGBTQIA+ component and dimension, and this issue around millennials, because we need to stretch our minds. We need to be aware that we can very, very easily exclude, undermine human dignity of people. So, Courtney, are you able to speak to us? Are you connected? And if you want to project your video, thank you. And I will flip the slides. I'll flip the slides, you let me know.
Great, thanks. Morning, everyone. It's a big privilege for me to be presenting to you all today. The issue of LGBTQIA+ isn't a new one. It's an issue that's been around for years and years, but only now it's starting to get the airtime and attention that it rightfully deserves. If you think back to the early 1900s, I mean, the thought of a woman even being allowed in the workplace to express herself and dress how she wants to was absolutely absurd to most people. But as we can see now in 2022, we've come a long way in including women. So why can the same not be done for the LGBTQIA+ community? As John mentioned earlier, if you don't understand people, you do not understand business. Because to understand business, you have to understand your workforce. By the year 2025, it's predicted that 75% of your workforce will consist of millennials. Why is this important? Well, millennials are more than 2 times as likely to identify as part of the LGBTQIA+ community. So if you are not aware that you have to understand the factors of LGBTQIA and realize that you mustn't treat it as a values issue, because values issues cannot be resolved as easily as that data issues. So if we look at understanding LGBTQIA+, the first step is to understand the difference between sex and gender. Sex is the set of biological attributes that a person is born with. When they are born, a doctor will deem a person either generally male or female. However, this is not correct. Male and female, girls and boys, men and women are socially constructed roles given to people based on their sex at birth. However, a person may not identify in terms of gender with the sex they are born with. These people fall under transgender identity. They may either identify as the opposite sex, opposite gender to their sex, or they may identify as both or neither. Individuals that identify as both or neither are referred to as non-binary individuals. Next slide, please. When people express their genders, they often use different ways they dress, they prefer different pronouns, they may even change their names and mannerisms to suit more the gender that they identify with. And this is not always based on their biological sex. Next slide, please. The first step to becoming a more inclusive workplace in terms of LGBTQIA+ is understanding your gender-neutral pronouns. A non-binary individual will usually not identify with the simple he or she pronouns. When addressing people in your workplace, it's important to use inclusive language and not gendered language such as he or she, him or her, because this does not acknowledge or validate the existence of those that identify outside of gender binary. For example, instead of saying hello, ladies and gentlemen in meetings or Zoom calls, you can say hello, everyone or all. Instead of his or her, use their or they. Say employees should not be afraid to voice their opinion, not his or her opinion. To implement this in your workplace, you can make it mandatory for all individuals to include their preferred pronouns in their email signatures. Make it part of your introduction as standard practice to say, "Hi, I'm Courtney. I identify with the she or her pronouns, and I look forward to getting to know you." This can be a nice way to start an open conversation and allow non-binary individuals or transgender individuals to feel included in your organization. You can make a habit of using the pronouns I've mentioned, such as all or everyone, when greeting a group of people. You must have an open mind and realize that this is a new issue for all of us, and we are going to make mistakes. Do not correct yourself, but simply move on and learn to not make it uncomfortable for anyone involved. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. In case you were ever wondering what LGBTQIA+ stands for, it's important to understand that not all transgender or bisexual people identify as the same section of being transgender. For example, lesbian and gay is same-sex attraction. Bisexual, you can form a physical, romantic, or emotional attraction to anyone from any gender, and the list goes on. You are welcome to read through this in your own time. Next slide, please. So, gender pronouns. Pronouns commonly used are he or she. However, it is becoming increasingly more important as the workforce is changing to use gender-inclusive pronouns, such as they, them. If you want to take it a step further, some individuals even identify with new pronouns, such as sie, her or hers, or sie, zer, and zers. This is often used for non-binary individuals who either identify more closely with a male or female gender. So why is this important, you ask? Next slide, please. When you look at your company policies, records, and documents, a common field to fill in is whether you are male or female. Some companies have included other, and it is more important to start including more diverse options than just male and female on surveys, forms, and documents. How are people who identify as non-binary, transgender, or part of the LGBTQIA community supposed to feel part of an organization if they do not even fit into their forms and policies? You must provide individuals with a chance to voluntarily specify their preferred pronouns on their onboarding documents, name tags, and as mentioned earlier, email signatures. Try to remove gendered language from policies and procedures. Try to use the pronoun they in place of she or he so that everyone feels included. If you're requesting for an individual to provide you with their prefixes, such as Mr. or Mrs., you should add an additional one, mx, mx dot. This is used before the names of individuals who do not identify as a specific gender. Next slide, please. Dress codes and facilities. Often you'll arrive at businesses and only male or female bathrooms, dress rooms, and changing rooms will be present. Also, in company dress codes, it's often categorized into male and female in terms of what employees are expected to wear. Instead of creating this differentiation between the two genders, it is a good idea to create one dress code in which generalized policies are given as to what employees are expected to wear and how they're expected to present themselves. To create more gender-inclusive facilities, It's a good idea to do a workplace assessment to determine if there's space and opportunity to create an additional gender-neutral restroom. If this is not an option, perhaps you should consider turning your existing restrooms into gender-neutral spaces where any gender is allowed to make use of these and not feel excluded or uncomfortable in their working environment. According to a survey recently conducted, the top priorities for gender-inclusive workplaces include an inclusive dress code, non-binary genders on records, such as the gender-neutral pronouns, gender-neutral titles, such as mix, zero-tolerance policies, as John mentioned earlier, are of utmost importance, and gender-neutral restrooms are required so that everyone can feel comfortable in their workplace. Thank you.
Thank you, Courtney. Colleagues, I'm sure you found that very, very interesting. One of the things that just resonates with me, colleagues, is if you take a look at the definition of harassment, it includes ostracizing, excluding, not recognizing, etc. And, you just think of the policies and procedures, the wording, the use of pronouns, dress codes, toilet facilities. Colleagues, these are areas that are definitely going to come more and more into focus as we move into an environment where 75% of our workforce comprises millennials who have got a higher propensity to identify as different genders. So, Courtney, thank you for that interesting input. And ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, call to action. As we come to the back end of this presentation, I just want to share with you my recommendations in terms of how you should be taking these issues forward. The first thing is I'd highly recommend you review your harassment policy. In other words, you need to make sure that those areas that the Minister of Employment and Labour prescribes that you include are in fact in your policy. The next thing is your grievance procedure. As you've seen, because the immediate manager could sometimes be the perpetrator, your grievance procedure has to cater also for people to potentially go to human resources or a non-line manager person, or even an external person, such as a counselor, psychologist, a friend, or a religious leader for help, because of the nature of sexual harassment. And then your disciplinary code cannot mince its words around the consequences for people who are proven to be sexually harassing, racially harassing, or any form of harassment. Once you've done that, you need to socialize it with your board of directors, your top managers, and of course, you need to get their understanding and commitment in respect of zero tolerance. Colleagues, zero tolerance, very important. Emotional intelligence training, very important. Point number 3, conduct an harassment risk assessment. Conduct an harassment risk assessment. Point number 4, awareness creation. Create an awareness, play a video, have an induction process, and keep records to prove that people have attended this awareness session. And then, colleagues, leading and managing with emotional intelligence. A highly recommended culture, which will in itself identify and eliminate any form of harassment at the workplace. With that in mind, I'm very, very aware of the challenges that you face as temporary employment services, workplace solutions providers. You are under extreme pressure from your clients, from your candidates, from your job applicants, from your assignees. Use this as an opportunity to differentiate. Use this as an opportunity to set yourself apart from the riffraff that are purely focused on task, but not focused on the human element. So with that in mind, these are my contact details. You're most welcome to reach out to us. You're most welcome to correspond in any way. We're always available to you. And Kevin, with that, I'm going to hand back to you. Thank you very much.